Have you ever noticed how strange the education system is? You study for weeks, sometimes months, memorize dozens of pages, sit in front of an exam, dump everything you remember onto the paper. And 2 weeks later, you barely remember anything. It's almost like the system was designed to make you forget. And here is the uncomfortable question most people never ask. What if the problem is your intelligence, your discipline, or your memory, but the method you're using to learn? Think about it. Some people seem to study less, yet they dominate every subject. They explain concepts clearly, connect ideas effortlessly, and when exam time comes, they walk in with calm confidence, not because they memorized everything, but because they actually understand it. Meanwhile, millions of students around the world are trapped in the same exhausting cycle. Read, highlight, reread, panic, forget. So what exactly are those top learners doing differently? Here's the surprising truth. The most effective learners don't focus on studying harder. They focus on learning differently. And there is one method in particular that is so powerful that once you start using it, exams stop feeling like threats. In fact, they almost become irrelevant. Because when you truly understand something, tests stop measuring your memory and start revealing your mastery. This method has been quietly used by some of the smartest thinkers in history. Physicists, programmers, doctors, engineers. And the crazy part, most students have never even heard of it. Not because it's complicated, but because it completely flips the way we've been taught to study our entire lives. Let me ask you something. When you read a chapter in a textbook, what do you usually do? Most people highlight sentences, underline important words, maybe write a few notes in the margin. It feels productive. It feels like learning, but research in cognitive science shows something shocking. Passive review methods, like rereading and highlighting, are among the least effective ways to retain information. Your brain isn't designed to store information just because your eyes looked at it. Learning happens when your brain struggles, when it searches, when it retrieves, when it connects ideas and rebuilds knowledge from scratch. In other words, real learning happens when your brain works, not when it simply consumes. And this is exactly where the powerful learning method comes in. It's called active recall. At first, the name sounds simple, maybe even boring, but the effect it has on learning is dramatic. Instead of reading information again and again, you challenge your brain to pull the information out without looking at the answer, and that tiny shift changes everything. Imagine this simple scenario. You read a page about how the human brain forms memories. Instead of immediately moving on or rereading the page, you close the book and ask yourself, what did I just learn? Suddenly your brain starts searching. It tries to reconstruct the ideas. Maybe you remember part of it. Maybe you struggle. Maybe you get some pieces wrong. But during that struggle, something powerful happens. Your brain strengthens the neural pathways that store that knowledge. It's like building a muscle. Reading is like watching someone lift weights. Active recall is like lifting the weight yourself. Which one do you think actually builds strength? This is why top-performing medical students who have to memorize enormous amounts of information rely heavily on active recall systems, flashcards, self-testing, teaching the material to someone else, not because it's comfortable, but because it works. In fact, studies consistently show that retrieving information from memory dramatically improves long-term retention compared to simply reviewing it. But here's where things get even more interesting. Active recall alone is powerful, but when you combine it with another principle, it becomes almost unstoppable. That principle is called spaced repetition. Most students study in what psychologists call cramming mode. They absorb huge amounts of information in a short time right before an exam. It feels productive because you're seeing the material constantly. But your brain interprets that repetition as temporary exposure, not long-term importance. Spaced repetition does the opposite. Instead of reviewing everything at once, you revisit information at increasing intervals over time. 1 day later, 3 days later, a week later, 2 weeks later. Every time you successfully recall the information after a longer gap, your brain marks it as valuable and strengthens the memory dramatically. This is why some people can remember things they learned years ago, while others forget material from last semester. It's not talent, it's timing. Think of your memory like planting seeds. Cramming dumps a bucket of water once and hopes the plant survives. Spaced repetition waters the plant at the exact moment it needs. It's slowly, consistently, strategically. And when you combine spaced repetition with active recall, something incredible happens. Instead of fighting your brain's natural forgetting process, you're working with it. Every time you recall something just before you're about to forget it, the memory becomes stronger and stronger. This is the exact system behind many of the world's most powerful learning tools. Medical students use it to memorize anatomy. Language learners use it to remember thousands of words. Programmers use it to master complex frameworks. And once you experience it, traditional studying suddenly feels incredibly inefficient. But there's another secret layer to this learning method that most people overlook, and it might be the most powerful piece of all. It's called the Feynman technique, named after the legendary physicist Richard Feynman. Feynman was famous not only for his intelligence, but for his ability to explain extremely complex concepts in simple language. When asked how he understood difficult topics so well, his answer was surprisingly simple. If you can't explain something simply, you don't truly understand it. The technique works like this. After learning a concept, you try to explain it in plain language as if you were teaching a beginner. No technical jargon, no complicated definitions, just simple ideas. And the moment you struggle to explain something clearly, you discover exactly where your understanding breaks down. Most students never do this. They assume that recognizing information equals understanding it, but recognition is deceptive. Your brain can recognize a concept in a textbook and still have no idea how it actually works. Teaching forces your brain to reorganize knowledge. It connects ideas, it exposes gaps, it transforms information into understanding. This is why some of the best learners intentionally teach what they study. They write explanations, record themselves explaining topics, help classmates understand difficult concepts. Not because they want to become teachers, but because teaching is one of the fastest ways to master knowledge. And here's the fascinating part. When you combine the Feynman technique with active recall and spaced repetition, something remarkable happens. Learning becomes deeper, faster, and far more durable. You stop memorizing isolated facts and start building mental frameworks. Suddenly exams lose their power, not because you ignore them, but because you're no longer studying for the test. You're studying for understanding. Think about the difference. A student who crams information is constantly afraid of forgetting. Every exam feels like a gamble. But a student who uses retrieval practice, spaced repetition, and explanation develops confidence. They know the material lives inside their mind, not just on a highlighted page. And this shift changes your entire relationship with learning. Instead of asking, how do I pass this test? You start asking, how do I truly understand this idea? That question alone separates average learners from extraordinary ones. But there is one more mindset shift that turns this learning method into a superpower, and most people completely miss it. Top learners don't see mistakes as failure. They see them as signals. When you try to recall information and fail, your brain experiences a small moment of confusion. Many students interpret that as proof they're bad at the subject, but neuroscience suggests the opposite. That moment of struggle is exactly where learning accelerates. Every time you attempt, recall, and correct your mistakes, your brain adjusts its mental model. It's like recalibrating a navigation system. The more feedback it receives, the more accurate it becomes. In other words, the feeling of "this is hard" is not a warning sign. It's a progress signal. This is why the best learners deliberately test themselves before they feel ready. They embrace the discomfort of not knowing, because every mistake is a map pointing directly toward improvement. Imagine what would happen if schools taught this mindset from the beginning. Instead of rewarding memorization, they would reward curiosity. Instead of punishing mistakes, they would treat them as part of the process. And hear us the truth. You don't have to wait for the education system to change to start using this method. You can apply it today. The next time you study something, resist the urge to reread it 5 times. Read it once carefully. Then close the material and try to recall the key ideas. Write them down. Speak them out loud. Teach them to an imaginary student. Identify what you forgot. Then review only those gaps. A few days later, repeat the process. Force your brain to retrieve the information again. Each successful recall strengthens the memory dramatically. At first, it might feel slower than traditional studying, but over time, you'll notice something surprising. You start forgetting less. You need fewer reviews, and when exams arrive, you're not cramming information into your brain. You're simply accessing knowledge that already exists there. That is the real power of this learning method. It transforms studying from a short-term performance into long-term mastery. And once you experience that shift, something interesting happens. Your confidence grows. Subjects that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Complex ideas become clearer. Learning stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like exploration. So the next time someone tells you they studied 10 hours for an exam, remember something important. Time spent studying is not the same as progress made learning. The difference between average students and exceptional learners isn't effort, it's strategy, active recall, spaced repetition, explaining ideas simply. Embracing mistakes is feedback. These aren't secret tricks. They're evidence-based learning principles used by some of the world's most effective thinkers. And the moment you start applying them, you'll notice something remarkable. Exams stop feeling like terrifying obstacles and start feeling like simple checkpoints. Because when you truly understand something, no test can take that knowledge away from you. So here's a challenge for you. The next time you learn something new, don't just read it. Test yourself. Explain it. Revisit it later. Build the knowledge actively. You might be surprised by how quickly your brain adapts. And who knows, the next exam you take might feel almost unnecessary. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing for more content like this.